Right, Deb, ready to go live?
Yeah, ready. I think.
Perfect. Sure?
Yeah.
No,
Go for it.
Hey, good evening. I'm Andy.
And I'm Debs.
Stay tuned.
It's Codes of the Unknown.
Hello. Hello. Good evening. Sorry, didn't know what was going on then. So tonight we are joined by the wonderful Philip Mantle.
We are.
All the way from Yorkshire.
Ponte Carlo.
That's it.
Yep, sunny Pontefract.
By the sea.
Yeah. So we'll start off by asking you how you got into ufology.
Yeah, well, good evening, Deb. Good evening, Andy. Yeah, I mean, goes back a long time. I mean, as a young fella, I was always interested in all things paranormal, literally going back as far as I can remember. And I was interested in, in astronomy and the space race. And I was fortunate in some respects because where I lived, I used to live just outside of Leeds at this point, in a little place called Tingley. At my parents, and my best friend's grandmother used to live just over the road from us. Literally, I could see her window from ours. And she used to go to the local spiritualist church. So a couple of times I went with her, and I just found it fascinating. I didn't always agree with what they were doing. I felt they were genuine in their beliefs and what have you, but I was fascinated by it all, and with astronomy, what happened? I read one book, a particular book. I can't remember what it was called, but it had one chapter in it on UFOs,
right?
Basically dismissing them, which I found a bit strange because they were talking about other things in this book that were purely theoretical and just as outlandish, if you like, as a UFO subject was. So it kind of intrigued me why they would dismiss this subject. So I read a few more books, and I left high school in 1974 with no qualification, no idea, gormless 16-year-old, not knowing what he wanted to do. But I always had this other interest, everybody else, we like movies, we like, the opposite sex, we like football, whatever.
Yeah.
But I had this other thing, this paranormal thing, and it just continued to grow. And in the winter of 1978 over into 1979, a friend and I went to work in West Germany.
Right.
and couldn't speak a word of the lingo. I mean, not a word. So I phoned my mum up and said, "Mum, can you send me some books? Because if I sit here and watch the German television all night, I have no idea what's going on." I even went to the movies once to watch Superman, and I thought it would be, subtitles, but it was all in German. And it's the funniest thing you've ever seen is Christopher Reeve speaking German, although it was dubbed, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So she sent me a box of books, and lo and behold, they were all on UFOs. And so when I'd finish work of an evening, I'd sit down and I'd read these books. So came home in 1979. I got a bit more knowledge about the subject, if you like. Yeah. And living just outside of Leeds, Leeds then, as I believe it still does now, publishes the evening newspaper, the Yorkshire Evening Post.
Yes.
And my aunt used to live just round the corner from us. And she brought it round one evening and she says, "Philip, have you seen this?" And there was a little advertisement, and it was for the formation of the Yorkshire UFO Society. It was coming up that Sunday in Leeds, a place called Centenary House on North Street in Leeds.
Street, yeah.
Yeah, and in those days, of course, on a Sunday, the whole country used to shut. Never mind Leeds.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, I didn't drive. I caught the bus into Leeds, found Centenary House, and it was just one of the many rooms within it that was being hired for this event. And the Yorkshire UFO Society was formed by two brothers. The eldest was Graham, the youngest was Mark Birdsall. And they put on a presentation, which I thought was excellent. That was great. I could buy some more books as well. They had a table full of books.
Yeah.
And I just felt, I'd found my niche in life. Yeah. I felt as if I'd just walked into my living room, my home. I felt really at ease. I paid my membership fee, which I think was about £2 for the whole year,
Wow.
And we used to have meetings every Sunday at the same time at Centenary House. And I just went every Sunday and I tried to soak things up like a sponge and get my hands on as much information elsewhere that I could. And so I joined. I wanted to know more. And they said, welcome aboard. There was others that joined at the same time. Yeah. And I was up and running. And that's how it all started for me. Sadly, Graham passed away a few years ago. He went on to publish and edit a magazine called UFO Magazine, a newsstand publication that was, highly respected and sold in lots of numbers around the world. But sadly, Graham passed away. Mark is no longer in the field. He does something else. But they were happy days. So that's how I got involved. I was up and running with the Yorkshire UFO Society.
So did you discuss sightings or just talk in general? Or
we were very fortunate, Deb, that as it came into the 1980s, areas in and around the market town of Skipton in the Yorkshire Dales, for whatever reason, started to have a lot of sightings, particularly around the village of Carlton, which is just outside of Skipton, and Carlton Moor.
Yeah.
And somehow, a lot of these things, as well as other places, but a lot of these things found their way to us. I mean, our HQ, for want of a better word, was Mark Birdsall's flat at Lovell Park Towers in Leeds. God, yeah. And he was on the seventh. He was on the 7th floor. And so his spare bedroom was our HQ with maps on the walls and files and all this lot. And what we'd done in the interim is make ourselves as visible as possible. There's no internet, but we'd send out flyers. We'd leave flyers in local pubs and libraries and police stations. I mean, you name it.
Yeah.
And somehow a lot of these sightings came our way. We had a gentleman who was part of the group. He was a police sergeant in the area in Grassington. He'd had his own sighting, but things came his way as well. And some of that fed down the chain, if you like, to us. So within no time of joining the Yorkshire UFO Society, I was in, both feet first.
Yeah.
And so we discuss at the meetings the latest sightings. we'd hold sort of irregular sky watchers. Graham and Mark, not me in the early days, but Graham and Mark would also go to other places and offer a presentation.
Yeah.
We've published our own little, I won't call it a magazine. It was called the UFOs. Well, yeah, like a glorified newsletter. We called it the UFOs Journal. Still have copies.
Yeah.
We used to print it on a hand Gestetner, you
Oh
know.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we and we were up and running, and we had like we said, they had a membership, and that started to slowly but surely increase. But we were up and running in investigating the sightings that came our way as well. So we were kept very busy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It is.
Little acorns, eh?
Well,
I know.
yeah, I mean, it's from those early days that my new book took root. You know, I lived at Tingley, and the other direction from Tingley is Wakefield.
Yes. Yeah.
And that was also our local newspaper. It sort of borders with Leeds. And so I did a little article in the Wakefield Express, and they ran my telephone number. And a lady rang us, and she said, Philip, you won't believe us. You won't believe us. You won't believe us. You know, and I said, well, give us a chance. So myself and Mark Bursell went to see this lady. She lived in what was then the mining town of Normanton. The mines have all gone now, but they were still there then.
Right.
And she lived in a terraced house, but in a cul-de-sac, and there was no houses facing her. And it was also an elevated house. So you went up 6 or 7 steps into the front door. So she says the children were outside playing a ball game. It was a beautiful sunny day. And it was just after lunch. She's actually at the sink washing the dishes. And she said, one of the children came rushing in and said, Mum, there's an aeroplane crashed in the field. Because at the bottom of this cul-de-sac were some trees, a little stream, a little hill, and on top of this hill, there's a field with a couple of electricity pylons in it that goes out to what was Ferrybridge Power Station. So she came out the front door, and because it was an elevated house she lived in, she could see across these fields.
Right,
And she says, Philip, it wasn't an aeroplane. It was something on the ground that was shaped like a Mexican hat, but like a silver grey colour.
Yeah.
So she got hold of the children. They walked down the cul-de-sac through the trees. When you go down this dip, you lose sight of the hill for a second or two. They come up the other side, and there's a fence bordering the field. And she said, this thing is still there. It's on the ground. But now there are 3 humanoids, 3 tall men, all dressed in like a white boiler suit. They've got mittens on their hands and boots and a visor of some kind over their face.
Yeah.
And they're waving something over the ground. Now, one of the children tried to scale the fence, but she held him back. And at this point, these 3 beings walked to the rear of this thing, and then it rose into the air, stopped in midair, and then shot off into a clear blue sky at an angle. Didn't make a sound. I mean, not a sound.
No.
So this lady was called Mrs. Westerman, and she thought, this is bound to be on the TV news tonight, you know. So she sits down in front of the TV, nothing. She bought the local newspaper, which is still published today, I'm happy to say. It's a Pontefract and Castleford Express, which covers the Normanton area as well. Not a thing. She even went and knocked on some of her neighbours' doors and said, have you seen anything, you know?
Yeah.
Nothing. And of course, the M62 motorway goes right past Normanton. There's thousands of cars every hour.
Yeah, there is,
and she was, not only was she bewildered by what she had witnessed that day, but she was also bewildered why no one else seemed to have seen it. She was sure that, you know, it's a beautiful sunny day. There's people out and about. Normanton's not a huge town, we know that, but it's a busy little place, you know, and it's got, and if you go to the other side of Normanton a bit further down, there's the M1.
Yeah.
And so Mark was with me. We interviewed this lady. We even interviewed one of the children's friends because he'd gone home for his lunch, and when he come back, he'd missed all the excitement, and he was none too happy, you know. Now, they didn't call it a spaceship or aliens. And Mark Purcell was quite a good artist. So while Mrs. Westerman's talking, he's drawing and he did an artist impression.
Yeah.
And he showed it to her. He said, "Look, anything like that?" She says, "Yeah, that's pretty much." And they were only literally yards from this thing, because they could even define they were wearing mittens and not gloves. That's how close they were. So, we made the usual silly checks. I mean, it wasn't a helicopter. Why the hell would you land a helicopter there? And, so at the end of the day, I mean, my dad worked down the coal mines all his life. My dad was a miner. Mrs. Westerman's husband, he worked down the mine.
Yeah.
The children played a ball game that they invented, but it's the same type of thing I played when I was their age.
Yeah.
So we're left with saying these people either were telling the truth or they were lying. And I couldn't find any reason why they were telling any lies. I mean, Mrs. Westerman wouldn't allow us to use her real name. She wouldn't let me take a photograph. She didn't want any publicity.
Yeah.
And what's curious is a couple of years back, I did a podcast for somebody, and I mentioned this incident, but I didn't mention the lady's name. I just forgot.
Right.
And a couple of weeks later, I got an email from a lady in New Zealand. She says, "Philip, I'm from the UK, but I've immigrated to New Zealand, and I used to live in Normanton in West Yorkshire."
All right.
And she said, "What was the family's name?" So I said it was Westerman. She says, "My best friend was called Westerman. She's got a different name now because she's got married. I wonder if she knows anything." Well, she emailed her friend, and her friend was one of those children that I interviewed all those years ago. And I got in touch. I got in touch with her, on email, and she confirmed all the things that had happened. She put them in like bullet points.
Yeah.
And because we'd run the art, a feature in the local newspaper here a couple of times to see if anybody else would step forward, but no one ever did. And that got me interested in. I was already interested in the UFO subject. That confirmed to me, if you like, that I wasn't wasting my time. There was something to this phenomena.
Yeah.
These were the kind of people I'd grown up with all my life. Find no reason why they want to be dishonest and invent such a story.
No.
But in particular landing cases, because we know that most UFO sightings that are reported to us have a conventional explanation at the end of the day.
Right.
That is just a fact. That's just the way it is. However, when you get up close and personal to these things, it's much more difficult to try and find a conventional explanation, because it's more difficult to misidentify something if you're standing on top of it, then it's a little light 3 miles away, which could be anything. Plus, you've got other eyewitnesses. There was a number of people involved. Now, the late Dr. Alan Hynek, the man who invented the phrase close encounters, worked on the movie and appeared in the movie of the same name. He used a thing that he called high strangeness.
Yeah.
So, in other words, the closer the witness is, the more witnesses there are, if there are any markings on the ground, if there's any documentation, etc. Each is another layer of high strangeness. And the more layers it have, then the probability is you're dealing with the real McCoy. Whatever the real McCoy is, of course, is another argument. But you are dealing with a bona fide close encounter account. And that was the first one that I personally got my teeth into. And this wasn't, in the middle of the New Mexico desert. No. It was in Normanton. It was just a few miles from where I lived. It was in my backyard, so to speak. Because, some of the news media and the debunkers will have you that it's only the hillbillies in wherever, in Hicksville, that see these things. But it's not, And Mrs. Westerman was just a normal lady. The kids were just like the kids I was when I grew up. Like I said, even the ball game they were playing. It's not one you'll see anywhere else. It was one we made up. Yeah. And I played it the same, and it just stuck an
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So it UFO landings, close encounters, whatever you want to call them. I always had an affinity for them because, things came into the Yorkshire UFO Society of every description. I mean, we had all kinds of things cross our desk, but that was the beginning. That's what really, made me interested in this particular aspect of the subject.
Yeah.
And here we are still talking about it all these years later. You won't see that on any documentary or anything like that.
No.
But there you go. That's how it all began.
Yeah.
Excellent. So can I ask you a question about that sighting? So when you said about the 3 humanoids, and then one of the kids was trying to climb the gate, did the humanoids respond to the woman and the kids? Or was it just
no.
Like
it was
nothing was going on.
No, it was as if they weren't even there.
Right.
I mean, Mrs. Westerman just could not grasp not only the encounter, but the fact that no one else stepped forward. Yeah. And I've heard that said time after time. I think it's same in paranormal cases sometimes as well. They'll say the same thing. I don't know how they missed it. Why didn't somebody else see it? It's almost as if you had to be at that location at that time to see this damn thing, or to experience it, whatever you want, whatever phrase you want to use. And I can still remember the look on her face when she's describing it to me. Yeah. She screws her face up and she's trying to figure it out herself as she's telling me. And like I said, her first words before she even said her name on the phone to me, she says, "You won't believe me. You won't believe me. You won't believe me." Yeah. But I did, and I had no other option at the end of the day. And but the humanoids just were doing whatever they were doing. They didn't bat an eyelid. They didn't turn their heads towards them. There was no noise, no odors, no smells. No. And it was a beautiful sunny day, and off it went. I mean, the children told us that the way it departed is exactly the same way it came. It came down at an angle, stopped in midair, and then just dropped it into the field. So they naturally run into the house. Said, "Mom, there's an airplane crashed." Yeah, because these are kids. Yeah, So, but no, there was no reaction either way.
Weird. It's just back in just briefly back in 1976, I saw at close quarters a massive craft pass overhead, and we were in the school field, and there was only me and my best friend that saw that, and she remembers it same as me to this day. But none of the other. It was a full school field of kids. Nobody else were looking at it. There was just me and her looking up as it went over, and it was low and it was huge. It wouldn't have been able to land in the school field when I think about it now. It was just massive, but my mum, as soon as my mum picked me up from school, all the way home, it was like, no, telling her all about it. So she actually rang Leeds Bradford Airport. She rang BBC and ITV because that's all that was on the go at the time. And nobody had heard of it. Nobody had reported it. There was nothing going on at Leeds Bradford. Yeah. It makes you wonder if it's you that's selected to see that at that time.
Well, there's lots of ideas of if, buts, whys, where, whens, but all you can do with is the facts. Apparently no one else saw this thing. No. Same with yourself, Deb. I mean, I also spoke to a gentleman who told me about his mum's sighting when she was a child back in the 1950s. And it was somewhere around the Batley area. It was near there. I can't remember exactly, but it was somewhere around there. And again, she was outside at break time at school. Yeah. And she saw these like a flotilla of things come over, and nobody else did. No. And this is a couple of years back. It's just before COVID when this chap contacted me. So we managed to get the local newspaper in Batley to run the story. Yeah. Just to see if there were any school children still living in the area from that era. Yeah. And see if, nothing transpired for it, but at least we tried. But again, she said it doesn't appear to be anybody else that saw it that day. And she was as baffled. She was still alive. I went to speak to her. She wasn't deceased. I went with this chap to see his mum. But yeah. It's cute. It's very curious, is it not?
It is, yeah. It's always baffled me.
It is very strange. I just jump in on that because a few years ago, when I was living in Milton Keynes. I was driving up the motorway coming off the M1, whatever junction number it is, I don't know. And I'd seen, to my right, a couple of miles away, is like a plasma ball, and it was dropping like teardrops of plasma. And there's about 4 or 5 of them. It was probably about October, November time. So it was about 4, 5 o'clock. It just started getting dark, and it was just like it was illuminated, but there wasn't a direct light coming from it, if that makes sense. And it's just like these teardrops, what look like plasma, just dropping from it and going into this field. And none of the other cars on the motorway, because it was quite slow moving traffic, was taking any notice of it.
Well,
I was virtually hanging out the van window.
That's Milton,
trying to get a better look.
That's Milton Keynes for you, isn't it? It's like the Twilight Zone of Milton Keynes. I mean, I went to Milton Keynes once and got lost because everything looks the same. I have a cousin that lives down that way, and he said, "Well, come down and see us." So I won't be able to find you. No. So but it is. And again, I've heard other sightings. People, like you said, driving down the motorway, and they see something and they expect everyone else to see, to see the brake lights go on and whatever, but it doesn't happen. No. It's a very curious part of the phenomena. There's a question waiting to be answered there, and I unfortunately I don't have the answer. But there you go.
Yeah, because that was about 6-7 years ago. That's like 2015, 2016. But I've never seen anything around that area since or before that. So
it's just strange how these things vary, isn't it? Like different size and shapes of crafts, and then, like Andy says, this thing's dropping plasma out of it, and
it looked like, I'm not saying it was plasma. It's what I imagine plasma to look like. Yeah, it was like a dripping effect.
Yeah,
and every time one dripped down, it kind of leveled off, and it's like a teardrop. And as it's falling, it turns into like a ball, and then just goes down. But where the tree line was, I couldn't see exactly where it was dropping.
Right. It's just all this UAP stuff. It's
very odd.
Well, the Normanton incident that I've just talked about, that's in the new book UFO Landings UK, and one of the reasons I just stick with UK material for the purpose of this book is to show that the phenomena happens to anyone. The people who have these encounters are your next door neighbor, your colleague at work, a chap over the road who you don't know, but you see him every day walking his dog. The people who have these encounters wouldn't stand out in a crowd. You could stand next to them and you'd have no idea. But there are things in the new book. You certainly get that encounter that you won't find anywhere else, because it's only me being daft enough to collate these things down the years, And there are some very, very, when we talked, I mentioned the high strangeness factor. Somebody said to me, was there any accounts that you've got, Philip, that you didn't want to put in the book? And there are a couple, and they are so strange. But I thought, well, no, because at the end of the day, the book's not there to indoctrinate anyone. It lets the reader come to their own conclusions about the phenomena in general, and also about the cases, each one at a time, and I'll give you an example. There's I can't pronounce it. I mean, being a Yorkshireman, I struggle with English, let alone anything else. There's a place in Wales called Macalinth, and it's July the 22nd, 1975. A young lad called Trevor went to the beach with his dad, and just off the beach there are some rocks. So Trevor, like a lot of kids, went to explore, and he climbed up these rocks. This is not mountaineering or anything like that. It's just some rocks by the beach, and his dad's down on the beach. When he gets to the top, he sees this object. It's circular. It's got coloured lights around it, flashing, and it's domed. It's got a see-through dome, but inside there are two creatures. but they don't look like anything you've ever seen before. There's just an outline of them, and the interior of them is all moving and squirming, almost if it's like liquid, and it's squishing around, and obviously it scares the bejesus out of this young lad, Trevor. So he runs down the rocks to his dad on the beach. Said, "Dad, there's a flying saucer, Dad, Dad," and he runs back up. And his dad don't take any notice of him. Just a kid playing, But his dad looks up the rocks and he can see Trevor hiding behind a rock. He's hiding down and peeping up again. And what he's actually doing, he's watching this thing.
Right.
And he gets even more scared because at one point, this little dome starts to open. So Trevor literally hides behind this rock. And when he looks again, this thing has gone. I mean, it's no sign of it. Now, I've been, like I've told you, I've been involved since 1980, read lots of things, interviewed lots of people, done talks and presentations, and I've never come across anything like that anywhere else. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. All I'm saying is I've never come across it. We talked about these layers of eye strangeness. So you have the young man's account. You have a secondary witness with his father, and then you have this bizarre sighting, this bizarre object on the ground. You can't misidentify it for anything else other than what it was. Even though it's a strange sounding place, because it's Welsh. And it is so bizarre. And I often thought, I don't know what people will make of this. But a colleague of mine, when he knew I was writing the book, he said, "Are you putting that case in, Philip?" I said, I cannot not put it in. No, because it is so unusual. And if had I not put it in, it would almost have been like censorship. But it's in there, and there's a little drawing of it, an artist's impression of what it looked like, and it is extremely peculiar. It really is. And you'll only find these cases, in this new book, UFO Landings UK.
Yes.
And make of them what you will.
Well, I mean, it needs to be out there, doesn't it? If something's happened to somebody, then it's an account, isn't it? It's a report.
Well, that's it. I mean, the reason for doing a lot of this, as a UFO researcher or investigator, whatever you want to call it, I mean, I don't know the answers. I don't pretend to do.
No.
So I just hope that, the things that we've learned, the things that we can document, eventually add to the knowledge base of the subject, and hopefully somebody who's a lot cleverer than I am will be able to figure it out. But it certainly won't be me. And hopefully the book will give people food for thought. If nothing else.
I'm looking forward to reading it.
Yeah, me too.
Anything that comes from the UK, I love it. I mean, I like other stuff from obviously all over the world, but if it's from the UK, it grabs me interest.
Yeah. Well, I've run my own little publishing concern called Flying Disc Press since 2015.
Yeah.
And the first book I published was called UFOs Over Poland.
Right.
And then I followed it up with UFOs Over Romania. Yeah. And I've published books from Japan, Brazil, and Italy. And as well as my own, these were all by other authors. Yeah. So one of the aims of Flying Disc Press is to try and provide, case histories, UFO sighting accounts, etc., from parts of the world that perhaps you hadn't heard of before. Yeah. Or you may have heard of one or two of them, but the language barrier prevented you going any further.
Yeah.
I mean, I've just literally, before speaking to you this evening, confirmed with a colleague in Brazil that he's going to publish one of his books, and he'll be hopefully finishing another one for publication next year.
Brilliant.
And when we talk about high strangeness, then South America is the place to go. But that's another discussion, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Can I just jump in on that, Deb? I think it's more interesting for the UK because of how small we are compared to the rest of the world.
Yeah,
I suppose, because you've got Europe, obviously it's made up of smaller countries, but in general it's a big place. Like the Americas, and you got Africa, and you got Asia, and everywhere else in between. We're just this tiny little dot on the map where there's quite a lot of high strangeness activity going on here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah.
Not just because it's where we're from and we live here, but I think because of how compact the stuff is that's going on.
If you think about it, Andy, if you think about it, I know you do investigations, but if you go out into if you want to go out into the field, so to speak, then Britain's ideal for it because we are so small.
Yeah.
We don't have to rely on the internet and whatever. We can literally get in the car and go to these locations, speak to the people, face to face.
Yeah.
Which is what I did right from day one. And then I didn't write my first book until 1994. That was with a colleague called Carl Negatis. Carl had been a Fleet Street journalist, but set up his own PR company. And I'd done a few features with him, and we wrote a book called Without Consent, and it's all about alien abductions, again, purely in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
I did a revised edition a couple of years back and updated it. But what I tried to do wherever possible was, drive to the locations and interview the individuals face to face.
Yeah.
And I literally used to have a kit bag. And in that kit bag was a camera, spare batteries, some film, tape recorder, notebook and pen, and that was it.
Yeah.
And I used to chuck it in the back of the car, and my wife used to say, "What time will you be home?" I don't know. Don't even know what time I'm going to get there. Never mind get home. And I was fortunate. I feel I was very fortunate to interview some of these people. Yeah. And for example, again, in the new book, the only sort of case that is fairly well known outside of the UK is one that's in the book. It was even Without Consent as well. And it involves Robert Taylor, and he was in Livingston in Scotland. And the event was November 1979. Mr. Taylor was a forestry worker, set off to work that morning, heading up to a place called Deckmont Woods, just outside of Livingston.
Yeah.
Livingston, if people want to know where it is, it's sort of halfway-ish between Glasgow and Edinburgh. Yeah. And he parked his truck. It's just him and his dog. Parked the truck. He's walking on the dirt track down through Deckmont Woods, and he comes upon this little clearing. And there in the clearing is this dome-shaped object. Mr. Taylor described it as having like a flange around the bottom of it, with that little mini propellers sticking up from it, although they weren't turning, but they were like little propellers.
Yeah.
And while he stood there watching it, stunned, either from underneath it or from behind it, came these two balls with spikes on. He described them looking like the sea mines from the Second World War, but just not as big, maybe football size. And it was November, so it was muddy, and he could hear these things plopping as they're heading, across the ground as the spikes are sticking in the mud towards him. Okay. They came up the side of him. He felt this tug on his trousers on about thigh level on either side. And then the next thing, he's out cold.
Yeah.
When he comes around, he hears a whistling noise, I believe, and there's a strong smell of sulfur. I think his dog's chasing its tail, spinning round. And this thing has gone.
Right.
So he staggers to his feet, gets back to his truck and tries to drive it. He didn't manage to do that. So he managed to stagger down home into Livingston. His wife was at home, and he's disheveled by this point. He's dirty. And she says, whatever, what's happened? And he says, I've been attacked. So she rings the police, and the police come. Mr. Taylor is a upstanding member of the local community. He goes to the hospital for a checkup, but he gets fed up of waiting, so he comes home.
Just like me,
the police go to the site, and they find it without too much problem. And just in this one area, there are marks in the ground. There's some like caterpillar tracks and some like U-shaped depressions in the ground. Mr. Taylor's heavy-duty trousers that he wore are ripped at both sides. They go right through to the skin. So the police launch a full investigation, and they carry out forensic tests on Mr. Taylor's trousers, and these tears in his trousers are consistent with exactly what he said. He felt like they were being pulled upwards. They do a diagram of all these marks in this clearing. They take photographs of them as well, and it froze that night. So this actually helped them because it preserved the marks in the ground. They were frozen, and they come up with a blank sheet of paper. They have no idea what happened. And it's the only UFO encounter of its type that has had a full police forensic investigation carried out. And I met Mr. Taylor a few years after the event. He was now living in retirement.
Right.
And I went to see him with a colleague of mine by the name of Malcolm Robinson. Malcolm's from Scotland. Malcolm was on site of this incident. I don't know if it was the next day or the couple of days after, but he was there pretty damn quick when it all happened originally.
Yeah.
Malcolm has also written a book about it. I'll have to get the name of it. I have read it, I do assure you. But Mr. Taylor still told the same story. He was still as bemused as he'd ever been. And again, we're talking yards away from this thing. I mean, a few yards, if that.
Yeah.
And Malcolm and I went to the location. This is going back a few years now. And the council had actually put a picnic bench in this little clearing. And, they concreted it into the ground. No big deal. So I just happened to say to Malcolm, why don't you get a little brass plaque made?
Yeah.
And screw it onto the picnic bench, Malcolm, to his great credit, I must admit, he took that idea and he took it up with the local council. And eventually, it wasn't a little brass plaque. They actually unveiled a huge, great cairn, big rock, with a plaque embedded in it.
Yeah.
And then, in the last couple of years, they've also put signs up and a little bit of information about the incident.
Yeah.
Mr. Taylor is no longer with us, but that all came from that little conversation that Malcolm and I had all those years back. But like I said, when we talked about the layers of high strangeness, so here you have Mr. Taylor, here you have markings on the ground that are not are drawn in a professional diagram by the police and photographed.
Yeah.
And you have a forensic test on his ripped clothing, etc., etc., etc. When you add all that together, all these different layers, you've got one very strange encounter.
Definitely.
The high. I did think about trying to work out a chart, if you like, of, a bit like the old clapometer in the Opportunity Knox days. I'm showing my age there, aren't you? How high up the high strangeness chart was each encounter, but I wasn't clever enough to do that. I thought I'll leave the reader to reach that conclusion.
Yeah.
But again, so I've put that in the book in UFO Landings UK, and there's there's a page from the official police report. I have a copy. There's the diagram of the land, these marks in the area, and a couple of photographs as well. And even though it was a long drive up to Scotland, I'm forever grateful for Malcolm for organising that those years ago and speaking to Mr. Taylor, because had I not done it then, he's now no longer with us. So the opportunity would have been lost. And yes, you can find the information from various sources. With cases like that, it is pretty well known. And but you can't beat going and speaking to the people and walking around the location and having a look. I mean, there's a little funny. No, I won't say. I won't tell you that one. That was a bit embarrassing. But
come on,
no.
You can't do that to us.
No, you can't. You started now.
No, that'll be in the sequel.
All right, that's all right.
But had we not gone there, Malcolm's telling me about when he first met Mr. Taylor. Like I said, I think it was the day after or a couple of days after the actual event, and Malcolm sat in his front room listening to this gentleman telling his story.
Yeah.
And you can feel the atmosphere, But a fascinating incident, a real fascinating case, and a lovely gentleman.
Can I just ask, did all these forensic tests and everything else, did they come up with anything? Did they find anything unusual, or?
No, there was some kind of powder on his trousers, some white powder, but there was no, nothing made of that. What they did discover is that the tears on his trousers, and I've seen them myself. Malcolm still has them,
right?
But they were consistent with what Mr. Taylor described happened to him.
Yeah,
that these sea mine shaped things came up the side of him, and he felt his trousers being tugged upwards. And at that point, he blacked out, and that's why I've put the report, one page from the forensic report that details that particular part of the investigation.
Yeah,
that these tears were consistent with exactly what Mr. Taylor had described, and the case was left open. They couldn't come up with a conclusion.
Well, no.
But yeah, and it's like I said, it's the only close encounter case in the UK that has had a full police forensic investigation.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So can I ask you now about the Isle of Wight incident?
Yeah.
I know you said it's quite a long story and what have you, but if you can just...
Well, like I said, there were a couple of cases I felt like these are so bizarre, but like I said, I'm not going to act as a censor. I mean, the book's not meant to be definitive in any way. I had to draw a line in the sand, otherwise it would never have got written.
Yeah.
But one of the cases from the Isle of Wight in the 1960s, I can't remember the date without looking it up. I've never been able to remember dates, and that's my excuse for not remembering birthdays and anniversaries.
Proper Yorkshireman.
Yeah. But what it was on the island, there's two children, and they're playing, and they hear this noise, and it's in the distance, and it's almost like the Pied Piper. They feel compelled to chase this noise, which they do. They run across a local golf course, and they head towards this thing, and they come across this most bizarre humanoid creature. I am cutting a long story short. They hide at one point from it. They hide behind some bushes, I believe it is. But this humanoid, I mean, it's got 2 arms, 2 legs, head. It looks as if it's been made out of felt.
Right.
It's like a children's toy that's been made out of felt, and it's got odds and ends either stuck on it or sewn on it, but it's full size. It's as tall as you and I.
Yeah.
So they lose their fear, and they confront this being, and it talks to them, for want of a better word. It converses with them through a microphone.
Right.
And it takes them back to the UFO, for want of a better phrase. So this strange object that to you and I would look like a shed. I mean, I'd be proud to have that in my back garden. In fact, my wife's wanting a new one. Our old one's falling down,
Yeah.
And there's the inside of this thing is very difficult to describe, but it's this creature that really gets to me. It looks like it's made out of felt. It looks like something from a cartoon almost.
That's weird.
And it is the weirdest thing you've ever seen. I know the thing that I said from Macalent in Wales was weird with these shapes and all these jelly squidging around in it. But this thing is super bizarre. And I mean, you'll have to make of it what you will, because I can't figure it out. But it is, in my opinion, it has all the things about high strangeness in it, because you cannot find it anywhere else.
No.
It kind of reminds me of, I don't know, when I was a kid, we used to have on TV the Wooden Tops and Andy Pandy, and it's almost like a combination of things like that.
Yeah.
But extremely bizarre. And again, I've looked through as many things as I can lay my hands on to see if I can find anything similar to this, and I can't. So again, one of the ways to try and get around that is to publish it. And there may be other researchers in, I don't know, different part of the world pick it up and say, "Oh, that reminds me of such and such from wherever." But it is peculiar, and it is super peculiar, and that's one of the cases I thought. And is this too strange? But I thought, well, if we're talking about high strangeness, how can you have such a thing that's too strange?
Yeah,
like I said, I didn't want to be accused of censorship. And like you said, you'd heard my colleague Paul Sinclair mention that one case, but we never got round to talking about it.
No.
But if you have a look at it and yourselves, you'll see what I'm trying to get at. You'll see for yourself, because there's an artist impression of what this thing looked like as well.
Yeah.
So it'll give you some idea of what I'm talking about and how bizarre it is. But I think, when we look at these encounters around the world, whether we like to admit it or not, there is a cultural influence on them. And that's both UFOs, paranormal. The phenomenon remains consistent. However, we as human beings report them differently, dependent on our culture.
Yes.
And you'll see that in the book. The way the book's laid out, it's decade by decade.
Yeah.
And you will see how things slowly but surely change as the years go by. I'll give you an example. Back in the 1950s, the UFO community were hard come by to even try and talk about the extraterrestrial hypothesis. But they had no choice. And once they did start talking about it, then people started saying, well, I've encountered beings from another world. Yeah. And they were all beautiful, blue-eyed space brothers. They were here from Venus or Neptune or wherever to save mankind from its own misfortunes. And somebody said to me, where have the space brothers gone, Philip? In other words, where did this type of encounter from the 1950s go to? It's disappeared. You don't get them anymore. And it's the same as this book progresses. You'll see strange encounters, and then it changes as the decades go by. Now, that could just be that we're more used to them, or as UFO researchers, we've asked different questions. So, we learn to look for other differences, other things. There's a whole host of reasons why that may be, but it is a fact. I mean, if you look at just general UFO sightings today, if you listen to the news media and some of the UFO pundits, you'd think that all anybody's ever seen is these Tic Tacs from the USS Nimitz in 2004, which is not the case. It really isn't. But if you go back in time, if you go back to the sort of late 80s, early 90s, it was all these flying triangles, which culminated with the sightings in Belgium, of course. Yeah. And if you'd have been involved at that time, you would have thought that's the only thing that anybody ever reported, which is not the case. So, so the book, details things decade for decade, and you'll be able to see how things seem to change or evolve, I should say, rather than change.
Yeah.
And if anybody knows of another case like the thing in the Isle of Wight, I'd love to know about it. I would love to see it because it is just bonkers. It really is. And you make up your own mind. You read the book and think for yourself. Well, it might be that I don't have an answer. I really don't. But it's in there. Yeah. And perhaps I should ask Paul Sinclair why that stuck out so much for him. I'll ask him that later. Yeah.
Probably because it's so unusual. It's that's the first I've heard of anything like that. Something that looks like it's made out of felt. I mean,
I've got grandchildren, and I remember my kids. They had a
fuzzy felt.
Fuzzy felt. You cut shapes out, like you met little things, and that's what it reminded me of. And I'm only using the words I've got in my vocabulary. It's the best way I can describe it. It is bizarre. It also reminds me slightly of we have them every year, the gingerbread men in shape. You've got the outline of a gingerbread with a bit of icing on it for the nose and the mouth. Yeah. But it talks to them through a microphone. It's almost got like a portable karaoke.
That's weird.
somebody's asked me what year was that over the Isle of Wight. I can't remember. It's in the 1960s.
Right.
But it is in the book. I just can't. Right excuse. I'm hopeless at dates. Whenever I've done lectures down the years, the only notes I have is a little card in my hand, and it always just has the dates on. I just can't remember them. They won't sink in.
No,
it is a peculiar case, and make of it what you will.
It is just
very strange.
I wasn't expecting that when I asked about Isle of Wight.
Well, that'll teach you to ask questions, won't it?
Well, thank you for that. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
That's just so different to anything else.
Yeah.
But not only that. I mean, one of the beauties of being, I could publish these things myself, so that I've got nobody telling me what I can and can't do.
Yeah.
I remember another case that might not seem as high strange, but it always, it always sticks in my mind because I interviewed the man in question. Now, in June of this year, June 24th, it's the 75th anniversary of flying saucers.
Right.
So 75 years since Kenneth Arnold over the Cascade Mountains saw these things. And when he reported it to a local journalist, they said to Mr. Arnold, "How did these things move through the air?" And he said, "Like a saucer skipping on a pond." And flying saucers were born that day. But we have to remember that things were reported prior to that date. It's just that we use that as the modern starting point because it's when flying saucers came into popular culture.
Yeah.
But I used to live for a while at a place called Batley in West Yorkshire. Again, not far from Leeds, not far from Huddersfield. And I did some local media there. And a gentleman who lived just a mile or so from where I did, he contacted me, and he was called John Warren, and he was in retirement. And this goes back to the Second World War. So this was May 1943. Mr. Warren was based at Norwich in Norfolk at a place called RAF Ludham.
Yes.
And he was an armourer. So he wasn't a flyer, but whatever aircraft they had at RAF Ludham, he was responsible for arming them with their various bombs and shells and bullets and what have you. And he said, one night I went out to a local dance. And he said, silly me, I missed the last train back. So I had a 12-mile walk to get back to the barracks.
Jeez.
And he said, it wasn't the 12 miles that bothered me, the fact that if I was caught being late, I'd be in serious trouble. You were supposed to be back on time, and that was it.
Yep.
So he walks the 12 miles back. As he's approaching the location, obviously it's dark. Up ahead, he sees this green light by the side of the road. It's green, and as he gets nearer, he realizes there is a humanoid creature stood by the side of the road on the grass verge. Right. And it's stood perfectly still. It has a box of some description on its chest. And from the top of this box, there is a green light shining upwards.
Right.
And it kind of distorts its face. I don't know if you ever did it with a kid, put a torch on it.
Yeah.
And this thing looks like it's got a big grin on its face. And behind it on this grass verge, there is an object that Mr. Warren described as looking like a bell tent.
Right.
But it's illuminated. And then to the other side, there are two more of these creatures just stood there. And he said, it terrified the living daylights out of me.
I'm not surprised.
And he ran back to the barracks, and he was lucky that a friend of his had waited up and let him in through a window to stop him getting in trouble.
Yeah.
And he told his friend, and he asked me not to put this in writing, so I never did. He said, but Philip, he said, had I been armed that night, I would have shot this thing.
Yeah.
Because I knew it wasn't us being, the British military. And if it wasn't us, therefore it must be the enemy.
Well, yeah.
And he said, I would have shot it, And he says, even though I was I wasn't in the infantry or anything like that, we were all trained to use firearms. That was part of their training. and he had to have a knowledge of the guns and everything that were on the aircraft.
Yeah.
You know, he says, and again, much like Mrs. Westerman, going back to the Normanton case, I can remember sitting in Mr. Warren's living room at home with him, and he's got that faraway look on his face. He can see this thing in his mind's eye.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And he reported it initially in the 1960s, and there's a copy of his letter in the book. But then he saw me in the local news in the 1980s, and thought, well, I'll give this chap a ring, and I'm glad he did.
Yeah.
And you know, we have to remember this is 1943, so it's before Kenneth Arnold.
Yeah.
You know, it's at the height of the Second World War.
Yes.
It really is at the height of the Second World War. The tide had turned. The Germans were in retreat. And you're a serviceman at an RAF station, and you find one of these things standing outside of it. You know, I don't know what I would have done in his place.
No, I don't.
I really don't. I really don't. I would have probably turned around and run the other way, if I'm honest. You know, leave him to it. You know. But one thing I would have made sure is I would never late back to barracks again.
No, I'd have been in on time while it was daylight.
But like I said, again, you will never, you know, it's probably the only place you'll find this case is in my book. I did write it up for a magazine a couple of years back, so it might be floating around somewhere.
Yeah.
But I'm grateful that I had the chance to speak to Mr. Warren, you know, in person.
Yeah.
And you know, my father served in the war in the military and was blown up and all this lot, and he didn't tell me tuppence of what happened.
No.
So here I am with Mr. Warren. And he also told me about some of his other wartime exploits while we're having a cup of tea. But this thing really did puzzle the living daylights out of him. And you can't blame him, really. You can't. But I can still remember him sat there. And I've actually got a photograph of him in the book. And that's, you know, I don't know if it comes across in a reproduced photograph, but he still has that, you know, far away look in his face when I took the photograph.
Yeah.
And it's just an ordinary, everyday fella, you know, and like everybody else at the time in the 1940s, were all doing their Peace for the War effort, and he was a serving in the RAF.
Yeah.
Make of it what you will, because I don't know what to say.
No, it's just mad.
Yeah. Just quickly before we go for a break, so these things that were stood outside, did anyone else witness them from the base? Or any
not that he's aware of, because bearing in mind he was late, so you had to be back for a certain time. I think it was a couple of hours late. It wasn't 5 minutes, you know. And I know from speaking with my father and two gentlemen I used to work with that they served throughout the Second World War, and one of them, a gentleman I used to work with, his nickname during the war years was Yankers.
Yeah.
Right.
And Yankers, or Jankers, they might describe, was the military nickname for the military prison.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Right.
And he was a devil, how can I say it, for the ladies.
Right.
So he would go to the local dances, and he would be late back, and he would end up doing, you know, 2 or 3 days in Yankers.
Yankers, yeah.
Right.
And so, you know, and that was his nickname.
Yeah.
And so you can understand Mr. Warren not wanting to be late back unless he's got a reasonable excuse, because he knows what the consequences might be.
Yeah.
And that was, you know, I'd be given, how would we call it, special duties. You might be the peeling the potato. Yeah, you know.
All the good jobs.
Yeah. So, but that was an old guy I used to work with, and he said, you know, my nickname was Yankers during the war. So, so one of the things you didn't want to do is be late back.
No, definitely not.
Right, we're going to do a 4-minute break, and then we'll come back with everyone's questions.
Yes,
so,
we've got a few.
Just a few. So I'll see you in a few minutes.
Okay, look forward to it.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
And we're back.
That went quick.
Too quick.
Can I just jump in before we forget?
You can.
Somebody asked a question about the Isle of Wight case. What was the date? Well, it actually took place in Sandown, Isle of Wight.
Oh yeah.
I don't know the exact date, but it was May 1973.
Right.
So I got it wrong. I tried to remember it, but it was May 1973. So I do apologise, but that's that resolved.
All right. Thank you for that. Right. So we'll start with the viewers' questions. First one is from Rick Allen. And his question is, does Philip think there are multiple alien species?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, or the theory that these encounters are beings from another world, is the most popular and certainly, the most romantic. And I think all of us that are involved in the subject, even the skeptics, would love to say, I think we've got proof of beings from another world. I know I would. And I know when I first started, I had no doubt about it.
Yeah.
So we'll run with that. If these are the results of ET encounters, then I don't think it would be the wrong conclusion to draw upon that there may be more than one race visiting us, because there are so many different things reported. But then, like I said, we have to ask ourselves, is that a cultural influence that just means we see the same things, but we just report it slightly differently?
Yeah.
Because and things have evolved down the years. However, the opposite side of the coin is, if you are somewhat skeptical of that, we've learned over the last, 10, 20 years or more, that the visible universe is much bigger than we ever imagined. I think it's something like 40 plus billion light years across.
Right.
And there's an estimated 2 trillion galaxies.
Wow.
And within those galaxies, there is gazillions of stars and planets. So the possibility of life existing elsewhere, has multiplied as a result. However, so have the distances between us and another planetary system that may harbor life. The distances have got further. So that then reduces the possibility of us, being A, located in the first place.
Yeah.
And then B, being visited. And we've, but it's not beyond possibilities. I mean, some years back, I spoke to a well-known physicist from the States called Dr. Michio Kaku. He's very well known in the States. He's on all the TV shows, and he got a book out called, I think it was Hyperspace, it was called. But I went to interview him at his hotel, and he was adamant that there was no doubt that other dimensions existed. So rather than travel in linear travel, from A to B, there was the possibility of traversing interstellar space in some other form. And he used the little way of showing this is, if you get a piece of paper and you draw point A, point B, draw a line between the two. So it takes you a long time to get there. However, if you just bend that paper, then point A and B are right next to each other, and you literally pop from one to the other. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility. But as a UFO researcher, I think my job is just to contribute to the field of study and allow others to reach their own conclusions. And but it would be nice, wouldn't it? It would be nice.
Oh, yeah. You want to do the next one, Deb?
Yes. We've got one from Warren Hardcastle. Has Philip heard of Samantha Mowat? If yes, can he give us his thoughts on her?
I've never heard of her, and it wasn't me. I'm dreadfully sorry. I've not heard of Samantha.
I haven't either.
So I do apologise.
Nope, that's fine. Not going to know the answers to everything.
Nope. Only my wife knows that.
Yeah. Next question, slightly off topic, but we'll do it anyway. From Johnny Appleseed. Is that a great wearing Davy Crockett's hat behind you?
Well, that's it. That's interesting because there is a story behind that.
Cool.
What they're talking, what Johnny's talking about is over the other shoulder.
Yeah.
Whichever.
Yeah, I can't do it.
That one.
Do it that way.
Yeah. Over that shoulder on my shelf, there is an alien bust, which is an alien grey, so it's head and shoulders.
Yeah.
And it looks like a Davy Crockett hat. It is in fact made out of wolf skin. So it's a wolf skin hat, and it's actually from Norway.
Yeah.
Now in the early to mid 1980s, in a place called Hessdalen in central Norway. It's only a small place. It's 3 mountains. There's a couple of hundred people live there. Literally, that's all. They started having these strange lights appear down in the valleys, not flying over your rooftops, down in the valleys.
Yeah.
And the sightings made their way to UFO Norway and UFO Sweden. So they set up a base camp, if you like, in the Hessdalen Valley to try and capture these lights on film, see them themselves. They had radar set up, and they were successful. Cutting a long story short, today, for example, there is now a 24-hour scientific observatory there monitoring the Hessdalen Valley on a permanent basis.
Yeah.
But the late Dr. Alan Hynek, his last field trip overseas, I think it was 1983 or 1984, was to Hessdalen in Norway.
Right.
And my best friend is I met through UFO Norway. He's a gentleman called Odd Gunnar Road. He was part of UFO Norway. So Dr. Hynek stayed with him. This is in the winter. So they set off to drive to Hessdalen. It was so cold at one point, the car froze.
Wow.
Literally. But they managed to get there, and they gave Dr. Hynek a wolfskin hat to keep him warm. Yeah. And that is his hat. And it is actually signed by Dr. Alan Hynek himself.
Wow.
So it's a good question, and it has a UFO connection. I went to Hessdalen, I would say, in the late 80s, and it was cold. But, you know, I have a photograph. There's a signpost, and it says Hessdalen that way, and the snow comes up to about there.
Wow.
You know, and they did an amazing job. And Dr. Hynek called the Hessdalen project, as it's become to be known, he called it a UFO laboratory. Yeah, that's his hat that kept him warm while I was there.
Brilliant. Good. Oh, I love stories about stuff like that.
I do. Better than a simple yes or no.
It is. Right. The next question's from Paul Tucker, and it's, what's Philip's view on, I've got my glasses, but I can't see, Lou Elizondo and disclosure?
Yeah, I've got to be honest, I'm very skeptical of Mr. Elizondo and his claims. I've no doubt he did work for the Department of Defense in some way, shape, or form. I don't doubt that whatsoever.
Yeah.
But he's made a lot of claims since he first came out of the woodwork in 2017. And to the best of my knowledge, none of those are being backed up with anything. To begin with, he didn't want anything to do with the UFO community. He joined up with Tom DeLonge, and they formed To the Stars Academy.
Yeah.
And, you know, but now, he's left that.
Yeah.
And he's all over the UFO community.
Yeah.
And as for disclosure, so I would be skeptical about Mr. Elizondo. I would either say, put up or shut up.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Regarding disclosure, I mean, from the very first day I entered the subject, it's a well-known British author. I won't mention any names, but he was adamant that they're going to tell us now.
Yeah, I know what you
mean. The government. And who the hell is they? And which government? Who? And then, we're round to the 1990s. There was a thing called Operation Right to Know.
Yes.
And they literally all marched on Washington with their banners outside the White House. Oh, they're going to tell us. Again, who's they going to tell us? So now it's the same thing, just with a different name. It's called, now they call it disclosure. And you have the same, you know, you have a different set of talking heads telling you they're going to tell us everything and we're going to find out. And disclose, what they mean by disclosure is that the American government is going to release the information that we have or are being visited by beings from another world.
Yeah.
Now, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that has happened.
Yeah.
Who was you as individuals? Who would you trust to release that information to the world? If you think about it, you know, if it's Joe Biden, then he's got his enemies, and they'll say, I've told you, the whole pot's gone off his head, you know. Would it be the United Nations? Well, not every country in the world is part of the United Nations, and it has its detractors. Would it be from a religious point of view? Would it be the Pope, for example? Well, not everybody's Catholics, are they? No. And then, of course, there are parts of the world that are not part of the West and don't have Western technology and don't have television, or don't even have electricity. You have to remember that. So they wouldn't hear it anyway. So I don't think you should waste any time on disclosure, personally. You know, there is enough information out there from a wide variety of sources. You know, a wide variety of sources, and like my book, just reach your own conclusion. It's like, you know, the fictional Fox Mulder. Trust no one. You come to your own conclusions. I'm not here to tell you what's happening or what's going to happen or what I think's going to happen. I'm sure you're capable of doing that yourself. And, you know, so Mr. Elizondo, I hope he's right. You know, I hope he can make all these claims come true, but I'm not going to hold my breath. And if disclosure happens, I would be the happiest man on the planet. I really would. But you know, I don't think I'm going to be around to see it, but you never know. Let's hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's it. It could happen at any time. It could never happen. Right. Next question is from Rick Allen. And he's asking, can you give us your personal opinion on what the aliens want?
Yeah, great question. I mean, again, we'll assume, for sake of argument, that we are being visited by beings not of this planet.
Yeah.
And trying to figure that out is what they want. I mean, we look at the Normanton thing I talked to you about. You know, right at the beginning, they didn't pay any attention to Mrs. Westerman and her children. You asked me the question, did you look at them? I didn't pay any attention at all. Now, I have a colleague, I think I told you that my second book I published was called UFOs over Romania. It was written by a Romanian scientist called Dr. Dan Farkas. Dan followed that up with a book called Hypercivilizations. And this is his theory on what he believes is behind the UFO phenomena. He believes we are being visited by beings not of this world. But one thing that really bugged Dan, he calls them the ufonauts.
Right.
Is, why do the ufonauts seem to do such stupid things? The team that didn't make any sense, like at Normanton, you know, they land, they get out, they wave something across the ground, they get back in and go again, you know. There's no interaction. Now, Dan's idea, and I'm not saying I believe him or disbelieve him, I just found it interesting, is that, yes, we are being visited by beings not of this world, but they are so far in advance of us, and we're not talking a few thousand years, it could be tens of millions of years, that on the evolutionary scale, we as a species are just not capable of understanding what's right in front of us. For example, Dan said, if you take a television screen and put it in an ant's nest, the ants will crawl all over it. They'll know there's something there. The soldier ants might even attack it. But never in a zillion years will they be able to find out where it comes from, what it's made of, what its purpose is, etc., because they are too far down the evolutionary scale to figure that out. So on an intergalactic perspective, we are the ants, you know, and these phenomena, these this species, these beings, whatever you want to call it, is right there in front of us, but we're just too dumb. Have you got to remember, you know, human beings, whichever way you want to look at it, haven't been around on this planet for very long, you know.
Yeah.
So we are quite low down the evolutionary ladder. If you think about some of the other star systems that are out there, they're much older than ours. So Dan might be on the right track. Who knows? But it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting thing. And that could mean that we'll never figure it out, of course. But, you know, an interesting idea.
Yeah. Right. Next question is from Nickname. What is Philip's personal profound experience or piece of research?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. I mean, I've only seen some strange lights myself, you know.
Yeah.
I've never had one of these encounters. I wouldn't profess to. One of the other things I've been working on for the last few years is an event that happened in 1973, October the 11th, 1973, a place called Pascagoula, Mississippi, in the United States. Involved two gentlemen, Charles Hickson, who was 42, and Calvin Parker, who was 18.
Yes.
Calvin had gone to live with his family friend to work in the shipyard. So the idea, he'd work in the shipyard all week and come home on a weekend. He just got engaged.
Yeah.
And Charles Hickson was his family friend. Charlie got him the job at the shipyard. It was Calvin's first day at work. Now, the one thing both gentlemen shared an interest in was fishing. So Calvin's driving them both home that night, and Charlie, you know, lived in the area, said, fancy going fishing tonight? She said, yeah. So they get the gear, you know, buy some bait, and they drive to the Pascagoula River. It's not in the middle of a Mississippi swamp. It's right by the highway. It's a huge, great river. You know, they still do shipbuilding on it today. As they're driving in to park the car, there's a car parked up with a courting couple in it. They pass a no entry sign.
Yeah.
And Charlie says, oh, don't take any notice of it. And they park the car. They go to one spot, which is infested by flies. So they move to another place, which is an old abandoned pier.
Yeah.
They stood on the pier. You know, I often wonder what fishermen think about when they stood there waiting for a fish.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what Calvin was doing. He said, I'm stood there looking out across the water. He said, there's a ship going out. And he said, you know, I'm working in shipbuilding. I still can't figure out how them huge, great things managed to float, you know.
No.
Yeah. He says, there's the bridge. There's a motorway bridge, goes right over the river. And he just says a little off-the-cuff remark. And remember this, he says, and there's some figures over there. And then all of a sudden, these blue lights shine across the river from behind them. And Calvin thinks, oh, no, we're going to spend the night in jail. We should not have ignored the no entry sign.
Yeah.
So he turns round and he sees Charlie turning around at the same time to think there's the police car.
Yeah.
And of course, it wasn't. There was this rugby ball shaped object descending. It stopped about 18 inches off the ground. It had two lights at one end. It was giving off this intense blue light. At the other end, this opening appeared, and the light just got stronger. And these three very bizarre humanoid creatures literally floated out of this thing. They were, like I say, 2 arms, 2 legs. They had no neck. Their legs didn't move. They were stuck together. Again, they didn't have fingers. They had like pincers or mittens. They had pointed protrusions out the side and one out the front. 2 got hold of Charlie. 1 got hold of Calvin. Took them onto this thing. They were separated on board. I'm cutting a long story short.
Yeah.
They laid Calvin on a glass table of some description. This object from the ceiling came down and whizzed around him. Then another being appeared to Calvin, and she looked. He said she looked pretty much human.
Yeah.
But she had longer fingers. The middle fingers were longer.
Yeah.
They did things with him. They took his shoes and socks off. And this is a little thing for you to remember. He says they stuck something in his foot, and it really hurt.
Ow.
And then they were deposited back on the pier. This thing was gone. And, you know, Calvin was out of his mind, literally out of his mind.
Yeah.
At first, both gentlemen said, we're not going to report this because nobody will believe us. I think we're nuts. So they get back to the car, which is brand new, by the way, but the passenger side, the glass all falls out. Calvin tries to start it. It wouldn't start. It took them 20 attempts maybe to get it started. And as they're going down the road, they have a change of heart. Charlie said, we got to tell somebody in case this comes back and does it to somebody else.
Yeah.
So they pull into a convenience store and they use a payphone, and they phone. Charlie was in the military during the war, and he fought in Korea. And they phoned nearby Keesler Air Force Base. And they just say, we're not in the UFO business anymore. Ring the local authorities. So they do. If they phone the sheriff sends a car out and escorts them into town. They are both spoken to separately. And then they're both put in a room together. And the deputy comes up to a desk that's next to him and fiddles with something and leaves them to it. Unbeknown to Charlie and Calvin, what the deputy's just done is turned a tape recording on.
Right.
And the police think, we'll get him now.
Yeah.
This became known as the secret tape. He comes back a few minutes later, gets the tape. Charlie and Calvin are oblivious to this. They put it on there and they play it back, and they're still talking about what happened. Calvin's praying, and he's saying, I need something for my nerves. And so the police believe them. They send them home under the guidance that they'll not say anything to anybody. So what do? The next day, both guys get up to go to work in the shipyard, and a whole hell has broken loose. The story's got out,
Yeah.
They're sent to the hospital for an exam. Lo and behold, they're then taken to Keesler Air Force Base, where they'd phoned and were told to get lost to be checked for radiation. And when they're there, the radiation's coming back as blank.
Yeah.
The powers that be said, "Why are you here, gents? Why don't you tell us what happened last night?"
Mm-hmm.
And that's recorded as well, but not on tape. They have a stenographer.
Yeah.
And we have a copy of that. We have a copy of the secret tape.
Yeah.
Now, Charlie was quite open to talking about it, but Calvin wasn't. So what they agreed between them, they would say that at the point the creatures came out of the UFO, Calvin would say he passed out. He can't remember anything.
Yeah.
He lived 200 miles away, so he went off home. And Charlie appeared on a talk show, the Dick Cavett show, did UFO conferences. Calvin just disappeared into the woodwork, would only pop up every now and again. So in 2018, I'd got the rights to republish a book that Charlie Hickson wrote back in 1983 with a chap called William Mendez. It's called UFO Contact at Pascagoula. Charlie died in 2011. So I thought, I wonder if I could find Calvin and get an interview for the back of the book. So it took me a few months, but I eventually got hold of him. And he was very nice, but clearly didn't want to talk about it.
No.
No.
Unbeknown to me, Calvin had recently been to a funeral. And I think he signed some kind of book of condolence on the way out.
Yeah.
And those coming behind him saw his name. Where's
Calvin
Parker, the alien man? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Yeah.
Calvin thought this was a bit disrespectful of his friend had just buried.
Yeah.
But his wife, Waynette, who was the girl he got engaged to when this happened, said, well, why don't you tell your story? He hadn't even told her the full story.
No.
He says, yes, darling, placate the wife. I'll write a book. And then, a few weeks later, I'm on the phone. So he agreed to write a book. So we wrote the book. Much to our amazement, it's called Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter by Calvin Parker. Yeah. It became an Amazon bestseller. And Calvin, came out of the woodwork. One of the things he did, he was interviewed by a local journalist, and she made like an 8-minute documentary about him. Went out in the local media. Somebody put this on YouTube.
Right.
And one of the comments below it said, my mum and dad were on the opposite side of the river that night, and they too saw the UFO.
Wow.
So I got in touch with this. It was a young lady said, can you put me in touch with your mum and dad, please? Which she did. And they were Mr. and Mrs. Blair. And Mr. Blair was in the fishing industry. And they were on the other side of the river waiting for a boat to come in to take him out to work. It was late. He was none too happy. And they saw the blue lights on the opposite side of the river. Mrs. Blair said, looked like it was looking for something, or it didn't know where it was going.
Yeah.
And then Mr. Blair, he also saw them. Their boat came in, bearing in mind as well, Mr. Blair getting on it. As they're walking down this little pier, Mrs. Blair said, there's a huge, great splash in the water next to us.
Wow.
She says, I look down, and she says, there's a grey man in the water.
Oh, God.
So Mr. Blair said he saw the grey humanoid. He called it something different. He used the word humanoid.
Yeah.
Come up out of the water and was heading back across the river. Now, Mrs. Blair, the next day, like most of the area, saw Charlie and Calvin on the local news. And she said, even then, she thought, I wonder if something similar might have happened to us. She says that she had this impression that she could see something out of her peripheral vision, but she couldn't quite make it out.
Yeah.
You know, Mr. Blair, when he come back from his fishing trip, he said, don't tell anybody, you know, because they saw how people made fun of Charlie and Calvin, accusing them of being on the drink or drugs or whatever, you know, redneck this, redneck that, none of which was true, of course. No. So they didn't say anything. They had two daughters. They told them, and that's one of whom had wrote that little message on Facebook.
Right. Yeah.
And when we spoke to Mr. Blair, sadly he'd taken ill, and he was up to have an operation, and he literally didn't know if he was going to survive or not.
Right.
So he got hold of his wife first, and he said, "I've got something to tell you." We too did have an encounter that night.
Yeah.
And we were taken on board the UFO, and there's more. There's a lot more detail to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though he's really ill, his wife was as mad as hell because this had bothered her for nearly 50 years. And then he made her ring me on her mobile from the hospital.
Yeah.
And he told me, and she even filmed him. Yeah, we have a little, film from the mobile phone.
Yeah.
Thankfully, he survived the operation, but sadly died some months later. And to his dying breath, he told Mrs. Blair the whole story.
Yeah.
And remember what Calvin said when he stood there with his fishing pole. He's just gazing out across the river. Before anything happened, he said, I see this ship going out. Don't know how they float. He said, I can see the highway bridge. It's Highway 90. And he says, and there's some figures in the distance.
Yeah.
Were these figures Mr. and Mrs. Blair on the other side of the river?
Yeah.
Now, one of the things I asked Calvin when we first started to write the book, have you got any documentation, any photographs or anything like that? Excuse me.
Yeah, that's right.
And he says, no. He says, our house was hit by Hurricane Katrina and it was under, 8 or 10 feet of water. We lost everything.
Oh.
That's why we have no photographs of his family as youngsters, of Calvin as a youngster. They're gone. So while he's writing the manuscript, one of the things I set about doing was pestering the living daylights out of everybody I could think of who might have some documents, photographs, whatever. Now, when the incident happened, within 2 days, Dr. Alan Hynek was on site with another chap called James Harder. Later that year, in 1973, Hynek launched the Center for UFO Studies, which is still going today. So they were one of my first places to contact. They said, Philip, we've got a file on it. It had been scanned in. It's PDF form. We'll send it to you. Now, most of this file was mainly newspaper cuttings. Right in the middle of it is a one-page typewritten, so it's written on an old typewriter document, and it's called puncture marks.
Right.
And you can tell it's written on a typewriter because the date is wrong and they've gone over it and redone it.
Right.
So the document is written on the 13th of October. So it's 2 days after the event. And it goes on to tell you, I'm writing this 2 days after the event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it describes giving Charlie and Calvin a once over, a physical.
Yeah.
And it said that they found 3 marks on Mr. Hickson's left arm, which is where he said these things got hold of him.
Yeah.
And he said they found 3 marks. And remember what I told you to think about on Calvin Parker's foot. Remember, Calvin says, I'm inside this thing to take my shoes and socks off.
Yeah.
Something in my foot and it hurts.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to say, we took photographs of these. Now, I asked Calvin, who examined you? And he said it was Dr. Harder. Although he wasn't a medical doctor, he just gave us the once over.
Yeah.
And it says in this this document, and the photographs, are here. But there's in this file, these photographs are nowhere to be found. But this document seemed to back up what Charlie and Calvin had been saying. So about a year, 18 months later, I mean, everything was a bit blurred in lockdown. The same gentleman from the Centre for UFO Studies who sent me this file sent me an email and he said, Philip, I was looking for something today in some old files, and I assume you've got these, but I thought I'd send them to you anyway. I wasn't looking for them.
Yeah.
And there was some attachments. And lo and behold, the attachments were the photographs mentioned in that letter. So you have a photograph of Charlie Hickson's arm, like this, but on the inside there are these marks.
Yeah.
And then you have a photograph of Calvin's foot. Underneath there are these 3 marks. Wow. And then it even scanned the reverse of these photographs, and that's how we knew whose was who, because their name was on the back of them.
Right.
So you have Charlie and Calvin's testimony. I felt a prick in my arm. Calvin, I felt them stick something in my foot. You then have Dr. Harder writing this 1-page document about seeing these marks and taking photographs of them. And lo and behold, now we have the photographs.
Yeah.
They will all be released next year.
Brilliant.
And then you've got Mr. and Mrs. Blair on the other side of the river, totally unaware of what's taking place, until it went out on the news the next day, and they and they didn't tell the story until decades later.
No.
Also, there's also, as a result, all kinds of other witnesses have come forward who were in and around the area at that time. Say, I saw this, I saw that. They are the main things. So that's the answer to I can't remember the person's question. What's the thing you've been involved that intrigues you the most? And that is it. And we are so confident. I've been working with a lady by the name of Dr. Irina Scott in Ohio. Most of the time, I'd find these witnesses or they'd come forward and I'd speak to them initially. And then rather than have some strange sounding Yorkshireman speak to them at an unusual hour, just made sense for Dr. Scott to bring them. Here you have a bona fide scientist and a lady and an American. And it just made it easier to do it that way. And she interviewed nearly all of them. And next year, of course, is the 50th anniversary of the Pascagoula case. So we're compiling the book now as we speak, and we'll release it next year for obvious reasons. But we are confident that if we took all these people and all this evidence to court, we could prove that Charlie and Calvin had a bizarre encounter that night. We wouldn't be able to prove they were abducted by aliens or anything like that, but we could prove that something truly bizarre happened to them. Of that, I've no doubt whatsoever. Yeah. And but that shows you what we can do now as researchers. The case was dead. When I first went looking for Calvin Parker, I thought the obvious place is any UFO researchers in Mississippi. And I contacted some, and they'd never heard of the case. Never heard of it. You know, they sent me a couple of links to a website, and when I can find websites myself,
Yeah.
I want to talk to Calvin.
Yeah.
But you know, the technology allowed us to swap and change and pester things much easier than it used to do.
Yeah.
And it paid dividends. And there was a point in time where the witnesses just kept coming and coming and coming. My wife said I was like a man on a mission.
Yeah.
You know, and I would, you know, and we literally in this year so far, we interviewed the last witness we had on our list. I'll tell you the story. Have we got time?
Yeah.
Well, when Calvin's first book came out, a gentleman called Stephanos Panagiotakis from Greece got in touch with me. Now, in 1981, Stephanos was a radio operator in the Merchant Navy.
Okay.
And he docked in Pascagoula. And he was a UFO researcher, and his favorite case was this case. So he set about finding Charlie Hickson and getting an interview with him, which he did. But via a local contact, he was put in touch with a member of the clergy, a chap called Pastor Emmanuel Sigalis. And Stephanos managed to get an interview with him. And the pastor, along with a member of the probation office and a young lady, a church volunteer, set off that night, October the 11th, 1973, to go to a church meeting that was organized to help people who were struggling with alcohol.
Okay.
The young lady in the back saw this thing approaching from the right, alerted the two in the front, and it went right across them over the road in front of them, heading off towards where Parker and Hickson were fishing. Okay? Now, Stephanos interviewed this gentleman. Thank you very much. He'd since passed on, but we still have the interview. The guy who was sat next to him has passed away. However, there was the young lady in the back. And we managed to find her. We managed to find her this year. She doesn't live in the area anymore. She lives in a completely different state. And I managed to find her. And she was interviewed by Irina. And she has confirmed everything that the pastor said. So we have a full interview with her.
Brilliant.
And she was the last on the list. We have no one else we're looking for. We've got no more suspects in that respect. But, you know, you never know. Just when we thought we've got everything that there is to find, other things come out of the woodwork. But this was a case that was big when it first happened. It made headlines around the world.
Yeah.
And then it died a death. And then because Calvin went on the record and has now been treated pretty much with respect. There's even the local community, even a local charity got some money, and there is a historical plaque at the site of where this incident happened, dedicated to both Charlie and Calvin, and it was officially unveiled by the mayor.
All right.
So, and there's no taxpayers' money. It was all charitable donations and money raised for it, and it's there. And Calvin was there for the opening, and he cried. He said he wants his ashes spreading there when he dies. So it's a fascinating case, and one that will continue to grow in different ways, of which I don't know yet. I mean, I'm pretty sure something else will turn up.
Yeah.
But it shows you what you can do. If you're determined enough and you want to investigate, it doesn't have to be something that just happened yesterday.
Yeah.
No.
For example, it's Roswell. It's the 75th anniversary of Roswell this July as well.
Yeah.
Everybody who was a witness to anything at Roswell is now deceased.
Yeah.
So we are looking in your wardrobes, basements, attics, filing cabinets, for anything that might be left behind. A few years back, I was contacted by a film company in the States. They made TV movies, basically. And they said one of their clients was a private detective, and she passed away.
Right.
And her siblings, her children, had found a file amongst her possessions simply called Roswell. And in that file was a VHS videotape and some paperwork. They put the tape in the machine, and on it is an informal interview with a gentleman called Deputy Charles Forgus.
Right.
He was a deputy in the military, in the police.
Yeah.
And he'd been in the police since he finished in the military at the Second World War. He didn't live in Roswell. He originated at a place called Big Springs in Texas.
Right.
And on this, you see his military. I think he got a corporal or a sergeant during the war. You see his stripes framed on the wall.
Yeah.
Photographs of him as a young man in his police uniform, all this lot. And he's an old boy with his baseball cap. And he tells the story that in 1947, him and the sheriff were looking for someone who had been bouncing fake checks.
Right.
And they got caught, but were put in jail in Roswell. So they made arrangements to go and pick him up and take him back to Big Spring, Texas.
Yeah.
En route, they heard about something bizarre taking place on the police radio.
Yeah.
And they managed to find their way to it. And the deputy says it was the flying saucer crash. It crashed into a canyon wall. The military were there. He didn't recognize their uniforms, but they knew they were military. He saw the bodies.
Yeah.
He said after they weren't there long when they were politely asked to leave the area, which they did. Yeah. They went and picked up the prisoner, and that was it. So we published this in a book by Irina Scott, and it got out, and we were eventually contacted by Deputy Forgus's son, and Irina interviewed him, and he said, "Yeah, my father was a straight shooter. That's why he joined the police straight away after his military service, and he told me about this in the 1950s."
Yeah.
Now the reason that is important is because in the 1950s, Roswell was dead.
Yeah.
He had 15 minutes of fame in 1947 and died of death. So you couldn't read about it in books. There was no magazine or newspaper articles about it. It wasn't on television. But here you've got the deputy telling his son about what he saw near Roswell in 1947. And this, nobody knew this existed. This is a videotape in the files of a deceased private investigator.
Yeah.
And her son stumbled across it. So it gives you an idea of what else may be lying around,
Oh, yeah.
in attics, in basements, or what you can uncover if you're a dogged and determined researcher and investigator, like we have with Calvin Parker and the Pascagoula case.
Yeah.
And I hope you'll see a bit of that as well in UFO Landings UK,
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah.
So that'll give you some idea of the other things I do. I don't just write books and publish other people's books. I haven't hung up my UFO investigators' boots just yet.
Jolly good. That's what we need, though, isn't it? Boots on the ground investigators. Yeah. Right, we've got another question from Nickname. What case does Philip want to solve?
Well, there you go. Just mentioned it. I'd love to get an answer to the Pascagoula case.
Yeah.
I mean, the biggest debunker that the States had was a gentleman called Philip Klass. He's no longer with us, but he tried. I've got Philip Klass's whole file on the Pascagoula case. And I met him once in the 1990s. And he tried his damnedest in this file. You'll skip and read it. He's not trying to investigate the case. He's just trying to find some mud he can sling at Charlie Hickson.
Yeah.
Because if you know what it's like. If you throw enough mud, sometimes some of it sticks.
Yeah.
And that's all he's looking for. He's not looking for an answer. Now, on the rare occasion that Calvin would come out of the woodwork, one was for a television show. He didn't want to go on it, but he arranged to meet Charlie at the TV studios. And it ended up getting cancelled because Charlie says there's this scientist here. He wasn't a scientist. It was Philip Klass. He was a science writer. This had all been organized by a local journalist, and Philip Klass refused to go on TV with him.
Yeah.
So the journalist took them all out of the TV studio across the road to buy them some dinner. And
Yeah.
Calvin's bewildered by what's going on because he didn't keep up to date. He had no idea who the hell Philip Glass was.
No.
You know. So the journalist said, "Why wouldn't you go on the television with Mr. Hickson?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Because it's a hoax." In other words, he's lying.
Yeah.
Now, Calvin is a bit of a tough guy.
Right.
He's no objection to you saying, "I don't believe you."
Yeah.
Yeah.
However, if you accuse him of lying,
Yeah, that's a different thing.
It's a different thing. And he told Mr. Glass in no uncertain terms that if you called him a liar again, he might regret it, shall we say.
Knock him out, basically.
Yeah. Calvin said, "I wish I'd have kept my mouth shut because I didn't get any dinner. I had to fly home when I was still hungry." You know. So I would love to find an explanation for it or a permanent conclusion. Calvin's the same. He doesn't know what the hell happened to him. He says, "All I've been trying to do, Philip, is look for answers." And he's as puzzled as the rest of us. And there's a lot more to this case than I've been able to say in these last few minutes.
Yeah.
I recommend Charlie's books. Dr. Irina Scott wrote one called Beyond Pascagoula, and then there'll be ours next year. So I'd love to be able to get to the bottom of it.
Oh yeah. Intriguing.
Right. Next question is from Nickname, and so there's two more after this, and they're all from her. So, out of all researchers and experiences, which does Philip endorse the most, and why?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've been involved a long time, met a lot of people. I couldn't single out one experience here above the other. They're all important for different reasons. But there's several people who, when I got involved in the subject, who had a great influence on me. One was Graham and Mark Birdsall, right from day one at the Yorkshire UFO Society. Graham wasn't everybody's cup of tea. He could be his own worst enemy at times. He was a big character. He was a big man. He was 6 foot plus, He was a big personality. But there was another chap who rarely gets a mention now, and he was called Hilary Evans. Hilary, along with his wife, ran the Mary Evans Picture Library. And Hilary was a man of many talents, of extreme knowledge on a whole host of topics and subjects. Could be quite skeptical at times, but he did organize UFO conferences. He wrote a couple of books, not enough in my opinion, because he had much more to offer. But they're the ones that really had an influence on me. And of course, Alan Hynek. Probably the godfather of modern day ufology. Again, has his critics in his early days, but I never met him, so it would have to be those Graham and Mark and Hilary Evans. Sadly, Graham's no longer with us. Neither is Hilary, and I hope Mark's still around somewhere.
Yeah. Right. Next question from Nickname again.
It's more of a
it's not a question as such. Please, can Philip set up a Southern UK conference?
It's not going to happen, mate. It's not going to happen. I mean, I used to be a conference organizer. And it's where I first met my long-standing colleague in Norway. I mentioned his name with Hynek. It was called Odd Gunner Road with UFO Norway. And that was with the Yorkshire UFO Society. And I think the first ever overseas speaker they had was Odd Gunner from Norway. I think it was 1984 or 5. And we've been best friends ever since. I've been in Norway and Sweden many, many times. So the conferences we built up slowly but surely. Graham went on to organise his own events in Leeds, some of which were extremely popular. I moved on to work for the British UFO Research Association and a thing called the Independent UFO Network. And we started our conferences in Sheffield, and they just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And we kept having to move venues because we just outgrew them, and they came to an end when I moved on from Beaufort in the late 1990s. And so my days of organizing conferences are over, I'm afraid. But I am attending one this weekend in Hull, not organised by me. So they are still out there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Last question, again from Nickname. What of Paul Sinclair's research or accounts interests you and why?
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, you know, Paul's a trusted friend and colleague. Writes his own books, publishes them himself under the UFO Truth Proof banner. I would recommend them to anyone. But I think out of anything, it's Paul himself. Paul had a number of, I'll call them encounters himself, some of which are very puzzling.
Yeah.
Are very strange. You know, they have their own high strangeness factor.
Yeah.
So rather than anything he's investigated personally, and there's a lot, there is a lot, he's still at it.
He is.
Up in the on the east coast near Bempton and in and around that area. I would recommend anything written by Paul, but I'm certainly interested in his own experiences.
Yeah.
Because I can talk to him better about them rather than in the third person.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah. Superb.
Excellent. And that'll bring us to the perfect end.
It will.
As we just hit the 2 hour.
That 2 hours has gone. It always does, but it seems to have gone even quicker tonight. That's been fabulous, Philip. Thank you so much.
No, my pleasure. And like I said, I'd just like to thank everyone. And if you do buy the book, UFO Landings UK, please leave us a review on Amazon, as long as it's a good one, that is. But take a look at Flying Disc Press. I mean, we've got books from around the world, you know, lots of different authors, not just me. And, you know, if you need to ask me anything, I'm on Facebook.
Yes.
You know, I'm on Twitter. I'm easy enough to find. It's not. I'm not hiding.
No. Well, I've put all your links are up in the description. It's got your email, your website. I'll just put some pictures up of the books while we've still got a couple of minutes left.
There you go.
There we go.
And I guarantee you,
reading a book.
Yeah, I guarantee a lot of the cases in there you will have never heard of before.
Brilliant.
And like I said, it's available in paperback, hardback, Kindle, and the audio book is almost ready.
Yes.
Excellent.
Superb.
Yeah. So
that's on my list.
It is definitely audio. I'll be doing the audio because I can listen to it while I'm driving about all day because I normally listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
Well, I'm getting a bit, no offense to podcasters, but I'm getting a bit bored of them. A lot of them seem to repeat the same things, and it's hard to
He says he's getting a bit bored of podcasts after we've been talking for 2 hours. Cheers.
No.
Let's talk about kicking the teeth.
No, a lot of the ones we listen to are American, and they kind of like keep covering the same stories. Yeah, it's hard to find one with like new or newer material. So it was that.
Well, I hope I filled that bill to some degree tonight. Anyway, thank you.
It's been brilliant.
It was really good. Thank you so much.
And okay, enjoy the conference in Hull over the weekend. I'll be there tomorrow. I'll miss you because I can't attend on Sunday. But all I'll say is it's a great event. It's at the Freedom Centre in Hull. There might be a few tickets left at the door if you want to turn up. But you know, Chris has done a great job organising the speakers, and I'm going to have to go to bed in half an hour to make sure I get there in the morning.
You are, yeah.
Oh, that's like me. I've got to set off at 6:30 Sunday morning.
Oh, that's terrible.
I know. Nearly a 3-hour drive.
I'll think about you. No, what?
Thanks. I remember that.
All right, Andy. All right, Deb. Thank you for your time this evening. It's been a great pleasure speaking to you. And I dare say we'll speak again.
We will, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night. God bless.
All right, look after yourself. See you soon.
Right. Excellent.
That's us done.
I enjoyed that.
Again, it was good. It was really good.
Very good.
Yes.
So I'd like to say join us next week when hopefully we'll have Jay Austin on the show.
Third time lucky. It was on the week after, Deb.
It's no, you can't do that. That's not fair. You only ever asked me a week in advance. So stop that.
Luckily, I have my digital calendar.
Little post-it notes.
It's Sean Shelgen. I don't know if I pronounced his name right.
Children or something.
Shelgen. He's one of the members in our Facebook group.
Yes.
He's a paranormal investigator over in America.
Yeah.
And from what I can work out, he's going to be talking about the paranormal and witchcraft.
Woohoo!
So that's going to be another good one, as always. So
somebody's pleased that I got it right.
Yeah, you've got it wrote down in giant 6-foot letters in front of you.
No, I haven't.
Who's on the week after? Who's on
get lost.
Shut your face. It's Steve Mera. So, yeah.
I knew that. I just didn't want to tell anybody. I like to keep things to myself.
Right. Quickly, will I remember? So, I've been going out doing pre-recorded investigations.
Yes.
They're good, but I'm not enjoying them as much as what I do when we go out doing live stream investigations, because there's no interaction. So I'm walking around and I'm not constantly recording. I'll record something if it looks interesting, I'll hear a sound or something's moving.
Yeah.
It's not boring. It's boring for me because I'm not getting the vibe from it. So we are going to be doing, starting not this Wednesday coming, the Wednesday after, every other Wednesday is going to be a live stream investigation.
Yes.
It's going to be at different times, only due to the sunset. But I think it's only going to vary by about half an hour. So it's going to be 8 or 7:30 start. But the longest it's going to run for is an hour and a half. It's not going to be 2 hours like this is. Because I know it does get boring watching me just walking around getting.
Yeah, I get bored. I suddenly nod off.
Oh, thanks. So it's going to be about an hour and a half tops. But we have found a few locations where we're going to be indoors and we can set up cameras as well as doing the live filming. So it's all good. So it's going to start every other Wednesday. Possibly pushing to every Wednesday, just to keep Deb on her toes.
Yeah,
it's all right.
I have absolutely no life, you know.
Hey,
I said I have absolutely no life, you know. When this all goes off, I'm still sat here.
I am. I'm going to be sat here till about 2 o'clock. So
there you go.
Don't even knock it.
We'll get it all done tonight, and then you can have an early night tomorrow night, and then we can.
Well, I'll get it all done tonight, and then spend all tomorrow shopping. Can't
got
wait.
Sunday. Yeah, wiggly worms.
No. Huh?
Wiggly worms.
Yeah, I've got them in my bag ready. And the sour snakes.
That's it. That's what I meant. Sour snakes. Can never remember the name.
So thank you to Joe for doing the mods.
Yes,
thank you, Rick, Warren, and Nickname for asking the questions.
Yes, thank you.
And I don't think there's anyone else, was there?
No,
maybe a couple. I don't know. Sorry if I missed you.
Thank you all for watching anyway.
Yes. At least we don't have to do a phone call this week and wake anybody up at 10 to 5.
Yeah. And spend 2 hours just grinning.
But the good news is he's coming back on in August. It's a definite. I cannot wait. I really cannot wait. George has got to be he's just one of the best. He's so out there. He's just amazing.
Yeah, he is.
So,
he's funny. Yeah, I did laugh.
I did. I couldn't stop. I still laugh now. So yeah. Don't think we've got. Well, we might be doing one next Wednesday.
Might we?
Just a short one from the conference on Sunday.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we're just going to do a quick chat. It's probably only going to be half an hour. Yeah, it's just going to be a Q&A, half an hour, 40 minutes, an hour.
Yeah.
So that's next Wednesday. Then the following Wednesday will be live stream.
That's obviously if we don't spend all day eating sour snakes.
Well,
I'm not listening to anything.
You both? You know who I am?
Yeah, I suppose we could do both.
So, yeah, that's it.
It is.
So, massive thank you again for everyone for coming on.
Yes, enjoyed it.
everyone, the chat tonight was amazing. It's just everyone was in it.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, I like nights like this. And it's
Yeah,
just
I do.
so
It was
smooth
good.
and flowing, and yeah, so
Yes.
it's good. Also,
No,
how many weeks left for the closure of the meetup in Sherwood Forest? So that
was it 23rd?
23rd of May. I need numbers. We need numbers.
Yes.
And we're not doing it because we're anal and we've got OCD. We're doing it so we can choose which part of Sherwood Forest we can go. If there's only going to be a few of us, it won't matter. But if there's going to be a bigger group, we don't want to be sitting with the common people. We want to be, no, we want to be sat in our own group rather than sat where everyone else is going.
Yeah.
So if there's going to be like 10, 20 of us, we want our own area.
Yeah.
If there's 3 or 4, it doesn't matter.
No, but we still need to be near the facilities.
Yeah. So we're going to be there. I'm taking a couple of fold-up chairs. One for me bum, one for me feet.
Just bring a camp bed and I've done with it. A little snooze between the trees, leave us do it.
Yeah, so if you can go on the website, fill in the form, let me know.
Yeah.
So we get them by the 23rd. By the following week, me and our Deborah will have emailed you all with the exact location of where it's going to be.
Yes.
So without filling the form in, you ain't going to know. We need to have some control. We need to have some control. Oh, we was at the fair last week and we got a bow and arrow set.
Did you?
Bring that.
Is it one of them ones with the suckers on?
Yeah, I stuck it on the cupboard door.
Can you bring it on Sunday?
It brought me back.
Bring it on Sunday.
Yeah.
Fire an arrow. Go, excuse me, I'd like to speak to
you. Yeah. Put some sweets on the end. Oh, I don't know where this is going.
I don't either. I'm getting
Probably in the bin. Probably in the bin with the rest of them. Right. I can see the numbers dropping rapidly.
Yeah, I can as well. Yeah.
There you go. So we'll see you on Wednesday.
Yes.
See you on Friday with Jay Austin. We'll see you the following Wednesday, live investigation.
Yes.
In between now and then, I'm going to put a video up when I reformat the night vision part of it. I'm just going to put it up probably one day early next week.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it. So we'll see you Wednesdays and Fridays and whatever other. Should we just do 7 days a week?
No, I don't think that'd be possible, really.
No.
I don't have a life now.
It's all right.
Thanks.
Right. So we're going to go now because I'm getting tired. I've got loads to do.
Yeah.
So have a great weekend, everyone.
Yeah.
And
look
we'll
after
see
yourselves.
you on 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock Wednesday.
Yeah, we'll say 7.
Yeah, we'll do 7. Get it done by 8.
We could have photographs as well. There might be photographs.
Yes, there will be photographs.
There will be photographs.
Whether the other person agrees to it.
Yeah. Might have to just do some photo bombing, but we'll get photographs.
Yeah. So right, I'm going. I'll see you all next week.
Good night, everybody.
See you
later.
Take
care. Bye.